Good evening and welcome. I'm Steve Donovan, the Director of Alumni Relations at Trinity. Thanks for coming inside on a summer evening to join us on the virtual long walk. I hope the summer is off to a good start for all of you. Tonight, we're delighted to have assembled a very talented group of accomplished Trinity alumni who have blazed successful trails as entrepreneurs. And we're also pleased to use tonight's event as the launch of a new affinity group for alumni and students, which will be known as the Trinity Entrepreneurial Network, or TEN. For a small liberal arts college without a business school, nor an entrepreneurship major right now, Trinity has hundreds, if not thousands, of alumni who consider themselves entrepreneurs across multitudes of industries. And also today, many Trinity students are interested in making their mark as entrepreneurs and are eager to tap the loyalty and expertise of the alumni body to help get them started. Thus, we've created this affinity group, which will allow alumni entrepreneurs to find and talk with each other, as well as to serve as a resource to our students. We'll host this network as something called a group on the already existing Bantam Career Network, or BCN, which over 2,700 alumni have already joined. So check out the Bantam Career Network at bcn.trincol.edu. My colleague, Melissa Regan, will post that on the chat screen so you can see that. She'll also post her contact information so you can be in touch with her. But again, go to bcn.trincol.edu and register to be a member of the BCN if you're not already, and then more specifically, if you're already a member, go ahead and join the group for entrepreneurship. We'd appreciate that, and don't hesitate to reach out to Melissa with questions or suggestions. The network also promises to bring periodic events such as tonight's, where members of the Trinity community can learn from each other and hear success stories, as well, I'm sure, of some of the bumps encountered along the way. And I'm pleased to be able to turn tonight's program over to a remarkable entrepreneur, as well as one of Trinity's most dedicated volunteer leaders. Lou Shipley, class of '85, is a technology CEO and lecturer at Harvard Business School and MIT's Sloan School of Management. As the CEO of Black Duck Software from 2013 to 2017, Lou led the company's transformation into a global software security leader. In 2017, the firm was acquired by Synopsys Incorporated, the world's 13th largest software company. Earlier in his career, Lou was the CEO of Reflectant Software, which was acquired by Citrix Systems, and VM Turbo, now Turbonomic. He joined his first pre-revenue software startup, Avid Technology, in 1990, and lived in Japan while managing Avid's Asia-Pacific business. Lou currently writes and comments regularly on technology and business topics and serves on the boards of Wasabi, Century One, Teamworks, Fair Market, and Customer Gauge. He also serves as an advisor to Alchemista. He doesn't want me to read all of this, I'm sure. Lou earned a BA in economics from Trinity, where he was a member of the men's ice hockey team. And I know when he's not working hard, he's playing hockey these days still. While at Trinity, he studied at the London School of Economics. He went on to earn his MBA from the Harvard Business School. Lou and his wife, Amanda Clark Shipley, have 3 children and reside in Andover, Massachusetts. He serves as a member of the Trinity Board of Trustees and also as the volunteer chair of the Trinity College Fund. Lou, it's an honor to turn this over to you, and thank you so much for both being with us tonight and for all you do for Trinity.
Great, thanks, Steve. Happy to be here, and it's really fun to kick off the Entrepreneurial Network. You know, we're really pleased to have 3 very, very accomplished alumni, Marvin Pierre, Rachel Zinni, and Eric Rosow. So the format for tonight is going to be to have them tell their stories. Steve's went on very long on mine. The only thing I would add to that is that my dear friend and college roommate, John Molnar, I think is on tonight. When he was in this seat, when he was hosting, there was something like 1,000 people. So I don't think I'm going to be able to do as well as John, but you know, it's nice to have John here. He's actually an entrepreneur in his own right. He's the president of KCM, and we're actually writing a case about his launching of that firm, and it'll be a published case at Harvard Business School. So that's kind of fun. I also want to do a shout out for my freshman seminar advisor, Professor DePhillips, who's joined up, and a couple of guys from Black Duck, Nate Nermy and Will Gray. Thanks for joining us tonight. So the format will be these 3 panelists are going to tell their stories. I have a few questions for them, and then we're going to take questions from you, some of which have already been submitted. So let's start with Marvin. Marvin, can you tell us a little about your story and how you got it started?
I appreciate it, Lou. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see everyone on the panel this evening. My name is Marvin Pierre. I'm a class of 2006 Trinity graduate, also a BA in economics. Started my career on Wall Street, worked at Goldman Sachs for 2.5 years. 2008 recession hits, ended up losing my job. I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do next with my life, and ended up walking inside of a elementary or middle school in Brooklyn, and had the opportunity to share my life story with a group of young boys who my best friend from prep school, I went to Tabor Academy, had asked me to come in and speak to the young man because they were not taking school seriously, and felt that I could relate to the young man because I too came from a high crime, high poverty community, and I was able to reach levels of success. And so she hoped that my story would inspire them to take school more seriously. And so in doing so, had a great opportunity and great experience with the young men, and uncovered in that short experience that majority of the boys that I was speaking to in that classroom, it was a 5th grade class, and the highest level in terms of their reading levels that I saw in that class was a 3rd grade reading level. And then for me, I knew what that meant for those young boys, that many of them would actually end up dropping out of school, and many of them would also have a strong likelihood of being involved in the criminal justice system. And so it was at that point I decided to take a leap of faith and get into education with the sole purpose of helping young boys of color. Accelerated into leadership relatively quickly at several charter school networks in Brooklyn. Ended up coming to Houston to serve as an assistant principal of a KIPP middle school that was also an all-boys school, and did 3 years there, and also uncovered a very concerning issue that we currently face here in the city of Houston, but also across the country, which is the school to prison pipeline, where many of our young people are coming in contact with the juvenile justice system, mainly because of zero tolerance school discipline policies. So when we all went to school and we got into trouble, you either got a detention, an in-school suspension, or in worst case scenarios, an out-of-school suspension. And unfortunately nowadays, many of our schools are sending our kids directly from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. And what happens is many of those kids never get a second chance to get their life back on track. And so I decided to, being the bold individual that I am and always taking on life's most pressing issues, I decided to start a nonprofit called 8 Million Stories with the sole purpose of helping those kids who have been written off, thrown away from our school system and ultimately from society, and giving them that second chance that we all deserve, and helping them complete their education, develop job readiness skills, and also address some of the mental health and behavioral health issues that they need. And I've been able to run this program for the last 3.5 years, and currently we're working on starting a school based on this model. But really excited about the work that I'm doing in Houston, and happy to share more about our journey.
Wow, thanks, Marvin. That's an amazing story, and just tells us that the entrepreneurship arena is broad, and public entrepreneurship and for doing nonprofits is just as important as starting a private company. Next, I'd like to introduce Rachel, who's got a really interesting story about starting at a larger company and then starting smaller companies and going back to a larger company. So how entrepreneurship can be seen throughout your whole career. So Rachel, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thanks, Lou. I appreciate the introduction, and hello, everybody. It's so exciting to see everybody join us this evening as we kick off the Entrepreneurial Network. So thank you. I'm Rachel Zinni. I'm class of 92. I was a political science major at Trinity. I didn't major in economics or anything business related. I did, however, take an accounting class my first semester of my senior year, and actually liked it. It was an evening class taught by an adjunct professor who, was just coming in once a week to teach, who was in the profession, and it struck with me. So when I went through recruiting, I was fortunate enough to get a job with KPMG, which at that time was one of the big 6 public accounting firms. There was a partner from Trinity who was in the Boston office, and he was recruiting for a program designated specifically for liberal arts majors. They recruited a handful of liberal arts students from schools in New England each year. to Boston and New York. They put us through school. We got a master's degree while we worked for the first 2 years, and we essentially went into the client service roles. So I joined the audit practice at KPMG in Boston. I really didn't know much about audit or accounting, quite honestly. It was definitely a learning experience, a learning curve for me. I spent about 5 years on the client service side, and then decided that I wanted to transfer internally at the firm. So I wound up shifting into campus recruiting. I did that for 3 years. I managed all of the campus recruiting for our practices into the Boston office. I also traveled extensively around the country to other universities where we recruited heavily into the Northeast and sort of represented the firm from that standpoint. I wound up moving to Chicago in the late 90s, early 2000s. I then joined a consulting firm that was based there, that was a strategy and technology consulting firm, and I headed up their college recruiting efforts for the entire company. I did that for a couple of years. I came back to Boston, and then actually shifted gears and went into academia. Boston College, the Carroll School of Management there, the business school, was founding a new master's program in accounting, and they asked me to come run it. So I sort of tried my hand at that for a few years. In the process, I was getting married. I was having my children. I was about to have my second daughter, and decided it was maybe time to take a break and stay home for a little while. So in the process of doing that, I stopped working about a month before she was born in 2005. And an idea that I had had when I was pregnant with my first daughter a couple of years previously came back to me. And so I had a few weeks to sort of implement that idea, which was essentially for a better hospital gown. When I was having my kids, it was the dawn of the digital photography age, and most of my friends were having babies at the same time. And they would send out those, emailed pictures with my friend, the mom, in holding the baby in the hospital with sort of the standard issue, gray, blue, institutional looking gown. And every time I got one of those pictures, I thought to myself, gosh, could somebody just wear something a little bit nicer? Like, couldn't they get a hospital gown in a prettier pattern that has a better color and is a little more flattering for these poor women who look exhausted and overwrought after having these babies? So when I was home after leaving BC, before my second daughter was born, I decided to action that. And I went out and sort of sourced materials and found somebody to make me a gown. I modeled it after a regular hospital gown, but I put different features on it, and I sized it more appropriately so it wasn't falling off of me, and that one size fits all thing that they usually give you at the hospital. And I came back from having her, and I didn't really know what to do with myself because I wasn't going back to work. So I just sort of did a bunch of research and found out there really wasn't anybody else in the market doing this type of thing. And I turned to my husband and I said, I think I'm going to start this business because nobody else is doing it. And I had so many nurses when I was in the hospital telling me they loved it and would buy it and I should sell it. And I had friends who wanted to buy them as gifts for their friends having babies. So that was sort of the origin of the business. So I spent my first couple of years figuring it out. I didn't have any training in fashion. Like I said, I didn't have any entrepreneurial background at that point. I was in my mid to late 30s. So it was all sort of new for me. And I got it up and running, and I grew the business, and I expanded the business sort of beyond a luxury maternity concept to be something for all female patients. And I, along the way, had another daughter. So I had 3 young kids at home while I was doing this. Then I went on to found another business. I had a friend who had worked with me at KPMG years ago. She moved to my town, sought me out, and wanted to start an apparel business that was focused on tennis attire for girls and women. And I was a tennis player growing up, and I'm also an avid golfer. So I sort of added that twist to it. And I had kind of the manufacturing contacts and the experience because of my previous business, Dearjohnnies. So I said I would start the business with her. So then Spoiled Sports was born, and that was about 6 years ago. So then I sort of fast forward, my kids are getting older. They're in high school. My oldest is about to go off to college as a freshman. And I sort of found I was losing my passion a little bit for my businesses. What drove me early on to sort of push through those long days and nights with those 3 small kids and building these businesses, I didn't have that drive as much anymore. And I felt like I plateaued a little bit and didn't really want to continue to grow the businesses in the way I needed to, and started to think about going back to working in a more structured, traditional work environment. So I actually started about 6 months ago. I went back to KPMG after 21 years and took a position there back in recruiting for the Boston office. So I've sort of come full circle. So I have sort of that perspective of, like you said, Lou, starting big, going small and entrepreneurial, and going back to big. And that being said, as I sit in my back to corporate job. I think every day about taking my current role and the experiences that I have today and how can I fit them into an entrepreneurial, another venture. So it still sits with me. So anyway, that's my story, and I look forward to talking to you more about it.
Great. Great. Okay, Eric, Eric just presented at the Trinity Tech Edge program about a month ago and told his story about Diameter Health. Eric, want to give us a little bit of background of how you've done 2 startups, right?
I'm on my second, so yes, I guess that counts as 2, but not quite your serial entrepreneur pedigree, Lou. And I wasn't talented enough to play hockey, but I was also part of the rowing team at Trinity and an engineering major, class of '86. I too have to give a shout out to Professor DePhillips because he was my freshman seminar advisor as well. So great to see his name on the board. So my journey at Trinity as an engineering major, not an economics major, really enjoyed the liberal arts education, but having exposure to critical thinking, systems thinking, and frankly, some of the early adoption of technology. Any of you out there that were engineering majors or knew Professor Gus Sapega back in the day, but he was a true visionary who brought a technology called LabVIEW, which I know is still being used today, to the college. I think he had serial number 6, and this was a company that came out of University of Texas in Austin, and it's now a publicly traded company, but it was a company that I actually built my first tech platform, that I built my first company with a fellow Trinity alum, Joe Adam, also class of '86, who in the small world category I actually met in high school chemistry at Hall High in West Hartford. So anyway, that was a great journey. I got the entrepreneurial bug. But before that, I graduated, worked at St. Francis Hospital for 2 years to get a master's in biomedical engineering, where I had the opportunity to get exposure to different technology, different vendors, different workflows, clinicians, capital budgets. And so that was a great experience. After that, actually had the opportunity to spend a year at Trinity as a faculty member of the engineering department, which was great. If you ever want to learn something, be asked to go out and teach it a year later. And I really enjoyed that. And that's when I was exposed to LabVIEW. And then after that, went to work for Hartford Hospital in their organization for a number of years. And really our first company called Premise, Joe and I co-founded, built that, was really an air traffic control towers, a software company that helped manage and optimize patient flow, patient throughput for hospital admissions, which any of us who've been in an ER or have to be admitted or wait for a bed, we helped greatly streamline that process through technology, automation, and workflow. We grew that, we scaled it, we bootstrapped it the first few years, ultimately took the red pill and brought on some venture capital, grew it faster, and within less than 2 years, we ended up getting acquired by what was then a leading electronic health vendor called Eclipsys, a publicly traded company, which has since merged with a company called Allscripts. And that was an incredible journey. And then being part of a startup, exiting, being part of a tech company, working at a large company internationally, and then really enjoyed that. But after about 4 years, just sort of kind of missed the hair on fire world of new venture creation. So some of the folks I had met during that journey, I stayed connected with and co-founded this company I'm involved with today called Diameter Health. Diameter Health basically takes a myriad of different clinical data from different sources and helps to enrich, normalize, summarize that data in a very efficient and actionable way to make better downstream decisions for medical care, healthcare outcomes. So it's been a wild ride, and I look forward to answering questions and sharing more. But I see one of the questions that popped up is, you definitely do not have to be an economics major nor a business major to be an entrepreneur. And the other thing I'll just conclude in saying is that entrepreneurship, while it requires founders, it is without question an ultimate team sport. And so nobody gets there alone. And every entrepreneur I've ever known likes to think of it as like a multi-year overnight success. So whatever you see the glory, just know there are a lot of sleepless, challenging nights that lead up to that moment.
That's a great segue to one of the first questions I had for each of you is, how do you handle the risk of it? And sort of you have your epiphany and you want this idea, take this idea and make it a reality. Marvin, maybe you can start. What's the first thing that you do to make your idea a reality?
One, you ask for a lot of help. Definitely find individuals that can really support your mission. So when I started my nonprofit, I knew One, I had to learn fundraising really quickly. And with a shoestring budget and very little in terms of a network of donors, I had to leverage community-based organizations that could provide in-kind services to the students that I was serving. And so I leveraged that to get myself going, knowing that if I could show impact and show great results, it would position me to go in front of funders and foundations to get additional funding to scale up the impact that I was having with the students that I served. So I think for me, my first step was just looking locally and tapping into some of the resources that existed in Houston that I could use to support the students that I was working with.
Well, thank you, Marvin. We're going to come back to this topic. You talked about fundraising and sales and how important that is in these startups and how you get that started. That's really interesting. How about you, Rachel? What the epiphany on the first company sounds very clear. What was it? What was the first thing you did to, you got some material, but then what did you do after that? What are some of the early steps?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Lou, I got some material. I decided to design a gown and wear it in and sort of try out the idea on myself as sort of consumer one. And then it really was when I was in the hospital after having my daughter, and literally nurses were calling other nurses down the hallway, like, you have to come take a look at this. Have you ever seen anything like this? Like, where'd you get this? Where do they sell them? And that was sort of when I had that light bulb that went off that was like, oh, this is more than just about me feeling more fashionable or comfortable. And this actually is really an idea and nobody's seen this before. So then when I went home, as I said, brought my daughter home from the hospital, and I remember lying there many nights, awake late at night and nursing her, and sort of everybody else is asleep in the house. And my mind just wouldn't stop thinking about it. I mean, it sort of, took hold. And so for a number of weeks, like anytime I could actually sleep, that was what I would think about. So that was when I sort of knew that maybe I needed to put a little more time and research and effort into this. And it wasn't just sort of an idea, and sort of start to do the research to figure out the viability of it. And so, the first place you start is sort of, does anybody else do this? And does anything like this exist in the marketplace? Or in my case, it didn't. But if something like your idea does exist in the marketplace, then how big is that market? And is there room for somebody else? Or what can I do with this product or service that's better than what it already exists in the market? So that was really where I started. I was somewhat fortunate in that I had just stopped working and wasn't relying on my, salary or my job to sort of maintain my life, because I had a partner who was working, who was willing to be supportive of it. So I was in a good place in my life because I'd worked for, 12 or 15 years before that, so that I could sort of financially afford to take a step back. And initially really, it was just about asking questions, as you said, Marvin. I mean, I didn't know anything about any of this. I would go meet with people, these factories, these cutting facilities. It was such an education for me. And I would just stop every time somebody used a term I didn't understand or talked about a process I didn't know. I would just say, I'm so sorry. Can you just stop and explain it to me, as if I've just walked out of the field and never talked to another person in my life. And I just did that time and time again. I asked a million people for help. And it took time, but eventually I sort of learned the lingo and understood kind of what path I needed to go down to start to build the business.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because that sort of weaves into the value of a Trinity liberal arts education, where you take different subjects, you learn a lot of different things. And the fact that you don't know something, kind of like Eric said, just because you don't have a certain major, doesn't really matter. I mean, you can be a successful entrepreneur, whatever you've studied. I have to say, when I think about recruiting, and I've done a lot of recruiting at Trinity, I think I've hired maybe 20 alums into companies that I've been involved with. The thing I tend to look for is, not what you studied, but how well you did. What was your progression? Like Marvin has on his wall there, become a better version of yourself each day. Are you getting better, or not? Because that's what a lot of entrepreneurship is all about. How about you, Eric? Can you take a crack at this one?
Yeah, so I think learning how to learning from others, learning from scar tissue, but talking to other entrepreneurs, reading. And by the way, I always either gift or recommend books, but one of my favorite books I read about entrepreneurship comes from a blog by Ben Horowitz. And this book I find is very raw and real about the real challenges entrepreneurs and startup ventures have, called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And also podcasts. I love Guy Raz on How I Built This, and just listening to different journeys different entrepreneurs have had. But I've always been, and there's no one right way to build or scale a company, but I've always been a fan of kind of bootstrapping, at least in the early years, and getting a minimum viable product. And then nothing greater than showing the value of that by actually having a paying customer to show that there's a need for what you did. And so I'm a big fan of that before trying to go on and bring on other people's money to help scale even faster. The other thing I'd say, I think this is true in any industry, it's certainly true in the tech industry, is culture matters so much. And that's not something you're going to learn in an economics or any other major class. It just matters. And I think a real X factor of any successful company is having the right culture, not only to attract, but more importantly, to retain the talent that share your vision, share your mission, share your passion, and really want to be part of something that's important, because talent has lots of options today more than ever. So I would just share those 2 points.
Well, it's interesting, Eric, because one of the questions that came in was, how do you, when you're recruiting for your venture, how do you, what do you think about? Do you want senior people that have been there, done that, or more entrepreneurial people like you that are right by your side, sort of sharing the dream? How do you think about hiring your senior team?
Yeah, so I'm always quoting other people. My daughter tells me I have no original thoughts, but I can quote a lot of other people. I think Steve Jobs once said, A players hire A players and B players hire C players. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so I've been really blessed to trust gut instinct, but trust track record, back channel references, and really understanding the why of why we want people on board, not just the what can they do. And I found if you can get the right leaders to join and the right board and the right mentors, they in turn can really help build and accelerate an amazing team. But I've also been a fan of, I think Colin Powell said, I hire for strengths. I don't hire for lack of weakness. And so I think we look for people that are really good at what they do, but also being diverse enough to complement all the skills that we need, including my own. I know where I think I'm strong, but I also know where I need people to balance out what I bring to the table.
Yeah. So Eric, you had mentioned, raising venture capital and how to raise money. Marvin, tell us a little bit more about how you thought about getting your idea funded, and did you go, what were your different options there?
Yeah, interesting. I started on 8 million stories. We were about $150,000 in the hole. No plan on how I was going to pay myself. I only had a small grant that I got that was enough to hire one staff member to help me run the program. And so talk about betting on yourself and betting on your vision. And so for me, in my first year, I knew that the model that I was the student population I was trying to support and help, I knew many people didn't think that was a great return on investment. And so going out and talking to people about, the fact that I wanted to serve young people who were involved in the juvenile system and had dropped out of school and helping them get back on track. Folks who had been funders in that space, really advised me with caution and say, well, Marvin, this is really hard to sustain this type of work. This population is just so transient. I applaud your ambition and your desire to support the student population, but it's just a really hard thing to sustain as an organization. So fortunately, I did not listen to that and just continue to work my plan and work my vision. And I realized early in the stage as an entrepreneur, especially in the nonprofit space, that people are going to bet on you. Right? You can have a great PowerPoint presentation, you can have a great vision, a mission statement, all the bells and whistles. But at the end of the day, when you're staring at that funder or that grant maker, they're betting on you and your ability to sustain some of the early challenges that they know that you're going to experience. And so I knew my story, my experience, my passion, and my ability to take an idea from a concept to a reality was what they were going to bet on. And I made sure that when I went in front of individuals, I left them with no reservations that I would be able to do that job and fulfill that commitment. And so with no outcomes, no data, no proof of concept at all, I just bet on my story and the fact that I wanted to help kids and that I historically had done that. And so I knew that I would have to, pretty much sacrifice going to several funders, pitching, and not, believing that I'm going to get any funding, right? I knew that a lot of those were just kind of introductory presentations where I'm just trying to build a relationship. And the idea was that I can get them to know me, get them to know my story and my why, and then come back in a year or two with some really hard numbers and impact, and then make the strong ask of them financially to support my vision. And that's essentially what I did. I mean, when I think about like my pitch deck that I use now in 2021 versus when I was doing this at 2017, it was like a black screen with green font. I was like, what the heck was I doing presenting anything to anyone, right? I'm like, no one should give me any money, but people believed in my passion and believed in what I was trying to do and knew that despite any challenges that I would encounter, I wouldn't give up on the mission and the work that I was looking to do. So I think for me, that was just something that I stick to. In nonprofit, you get a lot of no's and more no's than sometimes yeses. And you got to just learn how to bounce back and keep going. And, there's going to be some more yeses down the road.
Wow, amazing story. Thank you for that. Rachel, there's a question for you specifically. How do you market the product for your apparel company? I'd be interested to know. And did you finance this yourself, or did you raise money for your venture?
So for my first venture, I financed it myself. I didn't want to take outside money. I think when it first started, because I had young kids at home, I wasn't sort of sure how much time I could dedicate to it and how quickly I could build it. And I certainly wanted to be on my own timeline and not really be answering to other people. And then as the business grew and viability seemed, pretty plausible, then I got to the point of, well, how much do I want to have to listen to other people? Or so I made the decision not to take outside funding. With my second business, I had a business partner, and so we both self-funded the business as well. And then she subsequently left the business, so we sort of came to an arrangement on that. But as far as marketing the product, so in both cases, in the hospital gown case, sort of the timing of that was a little bit different because like print magazines were still very much a thing. People, looked at style pages and different things. I got a lot of celebrities who wore my gowns or gifted them, and then that was publicized. So I got a lot of traction early on. And so once that sort of happened, then I got a lot of inbound inquiries from boutiques and folks who wanted to wholesale. I got different reps that were coming to me in the South saying, we want to rep you to boutiques. So that sort of happened organically, and it was less about me going out and marketing. With the apparel, the tennis and golf apparel business is a little bit different. That's a much more established industry, obviously. So that was sort of a case of entering something and how is your product different and what, will make somebody sit up and look at that and buy yours versus, the Nike tennis skirt or golf skirt on the rack. So in that case, we sort of started small. So we had a very niche group of consumers we wanted to target, which were people that play tennis in sort of all white environments, meaning all white clothing, and sort of the restrictions around that and how you can take all white clothing that tended to be super boring and sort of nondescript and add a little bit of a flair to it so that people still were sort of complying with the rules of what to wear, but sort of had their own style on it. So that was sort of the origin of that. And then as we moved into the golf, obviously that wasn't really applicable, but I personally wanted clothes that sort of fit and were more comfortable and weren't necessarily designed for like 70-year-old retiree golfers in Florida, but were designed for people like me who were active and, young and wanted something that was a little bit more fashion forward and a little bit more comfortable. So we started really with local marketing. We did a ton of like trunk shows in our town, throughout New England. We, did a lot of outreach to clubs, both sort of private, semi-private and public, that had tennis programs, that had golf programs. We did a lot of custom orders for a lot of these places. And we sort of, once you do that and you kind of build in a population that starts wearing your stuff, you all of a sudden start to see the traffic on your website pick up, and you get people who are ordering from Arizona because their best friend lives in Connecticut and they were visiting and they were wearing this cute skirt and they were like, where'd you get that skirt? And so that just sort of starts to take on a life of its own. And then you create a lookbook and you start to get a little more formalized in that, and you send that out to different boutiques, and you have friends who say, oh, have you ever been to Florida? There's this great store. You should send them your marketing materials. So that's sort of the way that I've built my businesses. And, so it hasn't been super formal or sort of like an out of the box, here's how you market, but it's been sort of more grassroots marketing that then leads to broader exposure.
Got it. Okay. Hey, Eric, there was a question that came in for you. I remember when we were in school, you were on the rowing team, which was really good. I think you went to Henley, and the question was, how has rowing and your experience there impacted, your ability as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I think for me, it definitely has and still does. In fact, I still row, and I had the honor to row after college at a high level for a number of years. But I think just the core lessons of, I know it sounds trite, but teamwork, perseverance, putting in the hours. It's not on race day that races are won. It's all of those things. But I also think more than anything, it's taught me kind of the grit and the persistence to go through the hard stuff that all journeys have. And so for me, rowing's kind of been a metaphor, not only for startups, but for life. And so I know that all sounds kind of trite, but for me, it's actually very, very authentic.
Well, I can attest to that. One of my experiences, I've been a CEO 3 times. The last one was a company called Black Duck, which was a good company, but really what it was a turnaround. And I ended up having to replace, 12 of 13 senior team members. And it was pretty dark there for a while. And I remember reading one of Churchill's comments, which was, when you're going through hell, keep going. Which is, a little bit like some of the stuff you're talking about from Horowitz, which is, you just have to have the intestinal fortitude to get through this stuff. And I mean, Marvin, I think your story is so apt, because you're not only starting an organization, but you're really changing people's lives and getting people opportunities that they wouldn't have if your organization weren't there. So you talked a little bit about the toughness. What advice do you have for people on the panel thinking about starting a business? How tough you have to be to get through the tough times.
Yeah, I mean, that's, great point. I think for me, I struggle with a lot of the challenges that come with, kind of sustaining an organization financially. And, when you're starting out a, brand new organization, and you have such a very high risk, vulnerable population that is in desperate need of resources and support to ultimately break some of the generational curses that many of our kids are born into, you wear that pressure every day. And so I even think about kids like Tariq, who came to my program when he was 17, but prior to that, Tariq, who was homeless since he was 13, was a member of and heroin, and now is going to Alabama A&M University, and that wouldn't have happened unless he was in my program. And every single school in his local community kicked him out and said that, after he spent some time in the juvenile system and was really trying to get himself back on track, schools turned him away because of his record and his history of being a well-known street gang leader. And I was the only one that took a chance on him. And, look at what he's giving me back now in terms of, the impact that he's going to not only have on his life, but his son, but also he's breaking a generational curse, right? He's now going to be the first in his family to ever go to college, to ever finish school. And, when I think about the challenges that come with my work, I think about Tariq and so many other kids that are counting on me to do this work at a high level, because if there is no program like 8 Million Stories, many of these kids don't stand a chance. And we have in the city of Houston, almost 100,000 kids a year that are out of school and out of work. And so a small program like me is making a dent, but it's not significant enough. And, I just continue to keep myself motivated and inspired by kids like Tariq and Jeanette, who, was born in the CPS system and ended up spending some time incarcerated. And now she's going to Houston Community College to be an accountant. And so a lot of our kids, have been written off, but if it wasn't for our program, they don't stand a chance. And so that drives me every day, because I know kids are counting on me to keep this program alive and sustain it.
Wow. One of the topics that came in as a question was, and one of the ones I thought about was, how do you change your business and pivot it if it isn't working exactly the way you thought from the inception? So Eric, what do you think there? Because you've done this twice. How do you successfully pivot, and what brings on a pivot or a change?
Yeah. Just first I have to share, at the risk of being crude, a corollary from my book I reference about Churchill's quote. And I remember one quote Horowitz said is, if you're going to eat shit, don't nibble. So I think one of the lessons I've learned is, when you have hard things, just deal with it, take it on and get through it. But I think part of that goes with not being so enamored with your own idea while having vision, confidence, belief, grit, all the things that Marvin and Rachel spoke of and you spoke of, Lou. You really have to listen to the market, because at the end of the day, it's Darwin and, it's Darwinism. And so, one of my friends who was a product manager I have this sign over my desk that says Mejito, and it stands for nothing important happens in the office. And I think you have to be feet on the street and really listen to what the market winds are or what they could be. And sometimes you have a vision of what can be that nobody's even thought of. Like, Henry Ford said, if they asked me what I wanted, they would have said, I want faster horses. So sometimes you have to actually evangelize a new way of doing things. But more often than not, you just have to really understand what is the need today? How do you start with that? Pivot appropriately to respond to those needs where people will pay for that value so that you can kind of continue to scale your ultimate vision. And then the last thing I'll just say is what Marvin just touched on. And I think Rachel, the same thing. Like, most entrepreneurs don't start companies because they want to be on podcasts like this, or they think they're going to land up in the money. I think they do it because of the why, and they do it because there's a gap that they feel very passionate about needs to be filled. And you really need to have that. If you just start a company to think I want to have an exit one day, that's not a reason, in my opinion, to start a company. And that's not a reason that'll keep you going. I think Rick Cleary said in the thread here, my experience, 7 years is how long it takes to have an overnight success. So I think you really have to listen to the market and not be too attached to your ideas, and have people around you that aren't afraid to challenge you and to pressure test your assumptions and to tell you, I don't think that's a good idea, and here's why. That's how you get better ideas.
Yeah, to follow up on that, Eric, a couple things. One is from a perspective of an independent board member, and having a person on your board that tells you really the truth, right? Really can level with you what's not going well. And to your point about starting with the 6 startups I was in, I was not the founder, but each company that was founded by someone who had a problem in an organization, had pain, and sort of thought, maybe kind of like Rachel, maybe there's an opportunity here, or like Mark, maybe we can change people's lives. But they had pain, and then they started the company to fix that pain. I see a lot through my teaching of students that sort of do this, especially on the tech side, technology in search of an idea, which it can be a really painful, slow slog as an entrepreneur if you really have something that no one really wants. So my advice is always, to start with a pain and understand what the real problem is. In your case, Eric, you understood that, the hospitals needed an air traffic control system, or Diameter Health brings, more analytics that helps, like the state of California, deal with COVID. But you really seem to understand the pain, and then build the business around that. Can anybody comment on that? I mean, Rachel, do you maybe didn't see pain, but you saw opportunity?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I can definitely comment on that. And, the interesting thing is, when I started my hospital gown business, the idea was born out of the idea, the photographs and how people looked, but then it really went deeper. It was sort of about dignity, and patients deserve dignity. And whether you're in a hospital to celebrate the most important day of your life, or you're there to battle something that's the hardest thing you've ever faced in your life, at a minimum, you deserve dignity. And you're in such an institutional foreign environment, and so out of your element to begin with, that anything you can do that brings you some comfort and dignity goes a long way. And we always sort of say in the business, when you look better, you feel better. And when you feel better, you heal better. And so that was really about, when the business expanded beyond sort of the luxury maternity niche and market, just about sort of a fun, frivolous gift to buy your friend, I started to get a lot of customers who came back to me 1, 2, 3 years later and said, oh, I'm buying this for my mom who's undergoing cancer surgery. I'm buying this for my grandmother who's in a skilled nursing facility, and she just wants to wear like a hospital gown, house dress all day, or she has to because of the care that she's receiving. And I want her to have something nice. And so it really became more about that, and sort of how can you fix, to your point, sort of the pain. And I mean, how many movies have we seen that poke fun at the hospital gown and people's behinds hanging out of the back and how big they are? I mean, that's just been like a universal joke. And it was sort of amazing to me that nobody stopped along the way to say, can't we do better? Like, doesn't everybody deserve a little bit better? So absolutely, it's about sort of finding the pain point and trying to make it better.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came in from George Brickley was, you guys have all been successful. would you do it again? I mean, Marvin, why don't we start with you? I mean, I think I know the answer, but how do you think about that? If you go back to when your original idea for your nonprofit.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I would do this again. I mean, there's not a day I wake up regretting the decision I made to start a nonprofit for the students that I serve. I mean, every year we do a graduation ceremony to celebrate their accomplishments and completing our program and making successful transitions, whether it's to college or to a career. And you see the finished product, and that the journey wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty to get to the end, but it was all worthwhile. And so I love what I do, and I'm truly grateful that I have been put in this position to do this type of work, to be entrusted with the lives of so many kids that, for many of them, they don't trust adults because adults have failed them. And to believe the fact that, they would entrust me with their life, I take that really seriously and something I'm really grateful.
How about you, Eric? Would you do it again?
Well, I'm still doing this one, so I'll have to answer that wherever this one lands. But I think going 0 to 1, like as you said, I think going from nothing, founding, and then trying to scale is a longer journey, as Rachel and Marvin know. But I love what I do, and I feel young and energized in doing it. And while there was a time I was a younger person at other people, now I'm like one of the older people, and I'm surrounded by just such bright, passionate people. I will also say, though, I've always said that I think the greatest product any entrepreneur can create are other entrepreneurs. And that doesn't mean people that have to go out and found companies, but like Marvin, you're examples of the kids that would have had a completely likely different trajectory had you not created what you've done. And what are they going to do as they pay it forward today and over the next 30, 40, 50 years? And so that is what really motivates me as I look at a lot of the people that we've taken in and kind of seeing what they're doing now and where they'll be 5, 10, 20 years from now. So that I feel like keeps me engaged and hope to stay engaged as long as I can.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, if I were to do it again, I guess, my background is after Trinity, I did 3 years on Wall Street, and then I went to business school. And what's interesting about when I went to business school, I took a class called entrepreneurial finance, which is, a class on financing your idea. And it was as if a whole world opened up to me. I'd love to see Trinity teach this, because I wish I had found this before, I graduated college and spent 3 years in New York City, because this was like this whole world opened up to me. And then I found a pre-revenue startup on my own. I cold called the founder, got into the company, and it took off. And it was really successful. And once I had been in a small company that grew to be a big company and saw the opportunities that created, I was like, I'm never going back to a big company. Like, no way. Now, along the path, I've been in big companies because we've sold to big companies, but I didn't stay long, or we became a big company. And I realized at a certain size, I wanted to go back to the small company. But, that question of would you do it again? I feel like I would do it again. And that's one of the reasons I still am actively involved in startups and helping, I spend a lot of time with first-time CEOs, helping them be successful. It's not, I don't think, is the same social impact that what Marvin's doing, but it is good to help people create companies that have great jobs. So let me just pivot to, we're coming up on a couple more minutes here. Question for anybody here, maybe on thinking about business school. I mean, I can answer that one. That I think, I know a number of people on the call tonight went to business school. I think it's not a prerequisite for a successful entrepreneur. I think it does help. It can definitely break ties. You learn a lot, and it can be a really good network. I try and stay within the top 10 or 15 schools because I think those networks are the strongest. Let's go to actually, Rachel. Did you have any comments you wanted to make on the last topic?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, in terms of you asking if I would do it again, is that what you're asking me?
Yes,
yeah.
Of course, yeah.
So, for me, it's interesting because I've founded these 2 businesses, and like I said, I loved doing it and I had a strong passion for it. And, they were sort of obviously a different type of venture than Marvin's and a different type of venture than you and Eric have been in. And they were sort of more smaller in nature. But, when I started to feel like my passion was waning and I didn't love sort of some of the things I was doing, like having to do the marketing or the sales or deal with like the manufacturing headaches, and the logistics of all of that. When I kind of thought about it the last couple of years, what I really loved most about my businesses was the customer interaction, and sort of the front facing and working with people, which then as I thought more about that, I went back to, that's really what I did in recruiting. And that always felt like my strength and what, really motivated me and got me going every day. And so that was part of why I decided to go back to working in a more sort of structured, traditional environment. And I wanted to get back to recruiting. So I don't know necessarily that I'd go back and do it again. I mean, I think the lessons I learned were amazing, and I still have those businesses. And I've sort of debate whether I kind of put them on hold while I pursue this path of more structured environment, or if I shut them down altogether, if I sell them. I haven't really decided, because they feel a little bit like my babies, like they feel like my fourth and fifth children, and I'm not ready to sort of leave them. But I also really like the opportunities I have today to sort of go off and sort of return to the workforce after being out for so many years. And I think for sure, my experience as an entrepreneur allowed me to do that, because I was gone for 21 years, from KPMG, and yet I was able to step right back in. And I think that those experiences helped me do that. So I don't know if at this stage I have the energy to start another business from the ground up, because it does take a tremendous amount of passion. And, as Eric talked about, it takes the ability to get through a lot of really hard stuff along the way. And a lot of people say no, and a lot of times your ideas that you think are great, maybe the market doesn't think are great, or you do have to pivot, and that can be exhausting at times, and it can be demoralizing, and you really have to have a fair amount of grit to be able to push through that. So I don't know, maybe I've reached a point in my life where I'm sort of done. I've used up all my grit on that, and I'm going to focus on other things for now. So we'll see.
But let's talk about that, because it's hard. And maybe Marvin, I can ask you, like, how do you get support? I mean, emotional support. You have to do this for your nonprofit. Who supports you? Who helps you?
I rely heavily on mentors who have done this work prior to me, and so kind of walk this entrepreneurial walk prior to me, and I've leveraged their experiences and some of the challenges that they've experienced to learn from, and also to avoid. And so I think that has really helped me. I have several mentors that I frequently communicate with on a monthly basis, just to give them an update on how I'm doing professionally, but mostly personally. How am I balancing family and my personal life, so I'm not burning out and having the energy to sustain the work and continue to give 100% towards the mission. And so I think that's critically important. And that's one of the things that I did not have when I first started my venture. I was just kind of 24/7, 8 million stories. And, I found myself at some point starting to burn out. And if it wasn't for my mentors and other peers that are doing similar work, I wouldn't have learned how to balance the work and also just my personal life as well. And so I leverage so much mentors who can relate to what I'm doing and understand, and anticipate some of the challenges that I have coming, and how I can really best position myself to be successful and take those challenges on when they come.
Yeah, it takes others that can help you along. Eric, what do you think? How do you handle it?
Yeah, I'd agree with what at least, Marvin and Rachel said. I think I've been fortunate, my wife has been really supportive through 2 startups, and I think that's important, but having a founder, a co-founder, and having other members of your team and your board who, particularly in the case of venture capitalists, while they have high expectations and you need to deliver, they also know things go bump in the night. And I think learning from that experience has been important. But more than anything, just asking yourself, is what we're doing necessary, important, and needed? And that kind of gets you through. But then again, there's times where economics, market conditions, COVID obviously had a massive impact for the whole world. In the case of healthcare IT, in this sort of paradoxical way, it's actually accelerated and put a spotlight on the need for accurate real-time clinical data, particularly things around access and equity and timely information to treat populations at risk, et cetera. So, I think of Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste, but sometimes something as dramatic as what we've been going through can really actually be an opportunity to be even more mission driven than ever.
Yeah. How about you, Rachel? It sounds like you have a husband that's very supportive of your ventures.
I do, you know, and I have girls, and on they like over the years have helped me with my business, and they've sort of inspired me to keep at them, because I wanted to be an example for them. You know, I thought it was really important for them to see that you can still be a mother and still be a wife, but you can also still have something that's your own, or be a successful, you know, entrepreneur or businesswoman. And I thought it was important to model that for them. So they were definitely sort of a subtle form of support, because when I would get frustrated or get down or feel like I didn't have the energy to push through, I would sort of think about them and what that message would be to them if I kind of gave up. And so I think that was, for me, really important to have that. And yeah, you know, I had a lot of friends who helped me honestly on a volunteer basis in my business for years. You know, they would help me travel to different events, and they'd go as my sort of, you know, buddy and help out. They would help me at trunk shows when I was starting early on. They would connect me with a lot of people that they knew, you know, whether that was in the fashion industry or in, you know, the press or whatever it might be. So I think the most important thing is, you know, lean on people who believe in you and believe in your idea, and they'll be supportive, because everybody wants to hear about a success story, right? Everybody wants to hear what you're doing and how that's cool and different and interesting. And so people want to be a part of that in whatever way they can.
That's great. And I'm very fortunate that I have a spouse, my wife, that supported me through all my different ventures. One thing I'd say here is that the role of sort of founder, CEO, is, in some ways, it's hard to get objectivity to find out. And it sounds like Marvin uses mentors. I've used mentors. And I really think you need it. And I think, you know, what I think a lot of people think that's hard about entrepreneurship is, you got to come up with an idea, you got to finance it, you got to build it, you got to beat the competition, you got to go after the market. The one thing that no one really teaches you is how to manage your board. And I think that's actually the hardest part. And I say that as a person that's been fired as a CEO. And so I didn't manage my board well. And that was really tough. And so I think part of what I think you need to be successful is to get the objective opinion and say, what did you really do wrong there? Like, just go look in the mirror, because oftentimes it's your fault. You just have to have that objective opinion. I'm reminded of what, you know, Harry Truman said about, you know, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. I think that the same thing is similar in you know, entrepreneurship, is you just need somebody to really give you the straight truth. I had a couple of board members who were just really good, who could really tell me what was really happening. And so, because just about everybody else has an angle at you. It might be an employee that wants a promotion or a customer that wants a discount, but you need to find that objective help. And I think, you know, the mentorship that, you know, Marvin talked about is really critical. We were all fortunate. I was fortunate to have a lot of mentors in my life. And so it's nice to be able to give back. Well, I think we're up against the time. This is fascinating to hear these stories. It's such a great Trinity grit story too. I mean, Marvin, you're changing people's lives. Rachel, I love the story about, you know, someone who wanted to have dignity in the hospital, and you created that. And Eric, you know, you're still growing your business, and you're a great success in the greater Hartford area. I'd love to see more startups like you, you know, growing, creating great jobs in the Hartford area, and help us get Hartford back to what it was, you know, 100 years ago, as one of the leading cities in the country. So I think that's about it for us. But let me just thank Marvin, Rachel, and Eric for joining us tonight, for sharing your stories. Great stories, very, very interesting. And I guess the one thing we all said, the panelists all said at the beginning, is we'd love to hear from you, and reach out on LinkedIn if we're not connected already, and we'll you know, basically, you know, run the Trinity banner up as entrepreneurs. So join the network, and thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.